The engine of one of the Navy's most advanced ships failed, right on the eve of a major mission. Experts ran diagnostics, checked every sensor, tested every system. Nothing worked. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, someone brought up an old, forgotten name. When Brandon Clark walked in, grease-stained coveralls, a brass rod in hand, and asked for complete silence, no one there realized he wasn't just there to fix a mechanical issue. He was there to restore something far deeper, his own story. Brandon Clark lived just a few miles from the coast. The shed he called home had once been a marine engine workshop, decades ago. Now, it was his shelter, his workplace, and his entire world. Stacks of old fishing boat parts lined the walls, tools hung from worn wooden boards, and an old radio, still working, played every morning like clockwork. Since he was a boy, Brandon had an unusual gift with machines. He grew up taking apart rusty electronics he'd find in the junkyard behind his school and putting them back together. At 11, he rebuilt a lawnmower engine using only scrap parts. By 15, he was fixing his neighbor's fishing boat motors, without ever having studied mechanics formally. He seemed to understand the noise, rhythm, and pulse of machines better than anyone else. It was the kind of talent you couldn't teach, only be thankful for. In his younger days, Brandon served as a machinery officer in the U.S. Navy. He worked on all kinds of projects, from aircraft carriers to destroyers. His proudest achievement was helping develop the engines for the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, back when they were still just prototypes. At 72, Brandon looked younger than his years, and he knew the LM-2500 engines on the Arleigh Burke like the back of his own hand. But a failure at sea during a routine drill changed everything. The engine on his ship suffered a critical malfunction. The investigation was swift. They blamed him, said he'd failed to perform proper preventive maintenance. He tried to defend himself, but never got a fair hearing. Shortly after, he was forced into retirement, handed a generic letter, and met with uncomfortable silence. Brandon never accepted the story, but he learned to live with the feeling of being forgotten by a system that doesn't like revisiting its own mistakes. He returned to Tracyton, where he spent his days fixing boat engines for local fishermen and small-time boaters. He got calls from old fishermen who couldn't afford new parts, and from young mechanics who still had a lot to learn. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, an unknown number lit up his phone. Brandon wiped his hands on a rag, one so greasy it barely helped, and picked up. Clark speaking. Brandon Clark, this is Admiral Jim Lawson, Pacific Naval Engineering Command. Brandon furrowed his brow. That name came from long ago. Jim had been just a lieutenant when they worked together, young, sharp, and always eager to learn. Didn't think I'd ever hear your voice again, Jim. Neither did I. But we've got a serious problem. Brandon walked over to his workbench and looked down at a disassembled engine part. Go ahead. We've got a failure in the engine of one of our Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. 5 engineers have been through it, and none of them found the issue. We have a mission in a few days. The crew ships out in 72 hours. If this engine doesn't run, the mission's off. Brandon, we need you. Brandon stayed quiet. Just hearing the name of that ship stirred something in him. I don't have an active clearance, Jim. It's already being processed. Then send a car to pick me up, Brandon said and hung up. The next day, Brandon arrived at the gate of the Kitsap Naval Base carrying his old toolbox. The base stretched for miles along the coast, with massive docks and warships lined up like steel monuments. The USS Arleigh Burke was moored at the main pier, surrounded by technicians, engineers, and officers. Right away, Clark felt the looks of disdain from the young guards at the checkpoint. 2 recruits, no older than 20, exchanged smug glances. Name? One of them asked. Brandon Clark. I'm cleared. Where you headed? Intermediate maintenance facility. The recruit typed something into the system, then nodded and pointed him through. Brandon gave a quick nod in return. As he walked across the damp asphalt, he saw it in the distance, the gray hull of the destroyer. The intermediate maintenance facility was a vast building, with wide open space, reinforced concrete walls weathered by time, a high metal roof, cold overhead lights, and the constant hum of machines in the background. Inside, the place pulsed with activity. Maintenance bays were laid out in sequence like an assembly line, but each one served a distinct purpose. Disassembled engines on raised platforms, exposed turbines with open panels, neatly arranged electrical cables, and tools lined up with surgical precision. The polished concrete floor reflected the gleam of equipment. Yellow lines marked safe zones, forklift lanes, and thermal hazard areas. Overhead, rail-mounted cranes moved slowly, carrying massive propulsion components that weighed several tons. Technicians and engineers moved with purpose, checking clipboards, consulting technical manuals, or typing reports into terminals mounted on metal workstations. The dominant sound was a mix of engines being tested, the hiss of hydraulic valves, metal tapping, and radio chatter filled with acronyms and codes. Along the sides of the facility, there were glass-enclosed inspection rooms where engineers examined parts. And in the center, there it was. Mounted on a reinforced base and surrounded by safety markings on the floor, the LM-2500 gas turbine engine, removed from the USS Arleigh Burke, sat exposed. Its long silver casing revealed the compact and powerful engineering behind one of the Navy's most advanced ships. The side covers had been removed, exposing the axial compression stages and central shaft, which technicians inspected with flashlights and thermal sensors. One of them, crouched down, inserted a probe between the compressor blades, checking for extreme heat wear. Overhead, a rail crane held the outer cowling in place, while a digital display on the wall showed real-time vibration levels and structural integrity. The noise in the facility was hushed, broken only by the clicks of torque tools and the faint hiss of compressed air. At that moment, the heart of the destroyer lay there, wide open. Brandon walked in without ceremony, the sound of his boots echoing on the floor. He carried only his dented toolbox. A few engineers glanced up, pausing for a moment as he passed. He didn't look like he belonged. "That's the guy they called in?" One younger engineer muttered, barely hiding a smirk. Admiral Lawson was waiting for him. "Welcome, Clark. Good to see you again. The team's over there. Let's get started." Brandon shook his hand and walked over to the group. 5 engineers stood in front of the control panel. One of them, gray-haired, seemed to be in charge. "Mr. Clark," he said, not offering a handshake. "I'm Chief Engineer Watkins. We've been running tests since the failure. The engine loses power after 90 seconds of operation. We believe it's due to internal wear, possibly from salt contamination or suspended particles." "Did you replace the filters?" Brandon asked. 3 times, Watkins replied, clearly impatient. "We've also swapped out valves, tightened all connections, tested every circuit. Nothing worked." Brandon gave a small nod, accepting the challenge. "I need you to power up the engine," he said. "Impossible. We can't run a damaged engine without full safety protocol. We'd risk making it worse." "Then you're never going to solve the problem." Watkins leaned toward the others, whispering. Brandon could still hear a few of the murmurs. "Who even is this guy?" Watkins was visibly annoyed, but after a few moments he finally gave in. "Run the engine idle for 45 seconds, then push it to full throttle for another 30. Watkins raised his eyebrow. "Excuse me? Full throttle? Are you insane? That engine could blow. Either you do it or I walk. And I want complete silence in the hangar. No talking, no background noise." The group hesitated. Watkins let out a nervous chuckle. "Do you want this fixed or not?" Reluctantly, Watkins signaled for everyone to quiet down. Brandon pulled a brass rod from his toolbox. It was solid, worn on both ends. He placed one end against the engine housing. The other went to his ear. He'd hear everything, directly. "This is a joke, right? There's no way that'll work." Watkins glanced around, chuckling, but the others didn't smile. They were watching, curious, unsure. "Start it," Brandon said. The engine roared to life. Brandon closed his eyes and focused. After 45 seconds, he motioned to raise the throttle. The sound grew deafening. "Shut it down," he ordered. He stepped away from the brass rod, took a deep breath, and turned to the engineers. It's not salt damage. It's misalignment from excessive vibration. The rotor's drifting off-center at high RPM. It's producing an out-of-phase harmonic noise that only shows up in the last 6 seconds of peak rotation. The room went dead silent. Watkins and the others looked at each other in disbelief. Check the axial and radial clearances. Align the shaft with a laser. That'll stabilize it. Axial and radial clearance? That didn't come up in any of our tests, Watkins said. You're suggesting 5 engineers with state-of-the-art diagnostics all missed a basic alignment issue? Brandon picked up his toolbox and began walking toward the exit. Do whatever you want. My work here is done. He left the hangar in silence, followed by quiet scoffs and sidelong glances. In the jeep taking him back, he overheard one recruit mutter to the other, "Total waste of time." Brandon's phone rang late in the afternoon, just as he was draining an oil tank in the back of the workshop. "Clark speaking." "It's Engineer Watkins," said the voice on the other end. Softer this time, almost hesitant. "I just wanted to let you know we ran the tests again, with the engine hot. We measured the axial and radial clearances and checked the alignment with a laser, just like you said. The rotor was, in fact, off-center. The vibrations increased after 40 seconds, causing the wear we couldn't explain. The misalignment has been confirmed. You were right, completely right. The destroyer will launch on schedule, thanks to you." Watkins took a deep breath on the other end of the line, the kind of breath that carries the weight of a hard-earned admission. "The Admiral has asked that you return to the base tomorrow." Brandon didn't answer right away. He walked over to the workshop door. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken over Tracyton Bay. "All right," he said at last. "I'll be there." The next morning, just after dawn, a military helicopter landed at the old dock behind the workshop. The rotor wash kicked up dry leaves from the ground. Brandon stood at a distance, hands tucked into the pockets of his coveralls, watching. A Navy lieutenant stepped out of the aircraft and walked over to him. "Mr. Clark, I've been sent by Admiral Lawson. He requests that you accompany me to the naval base." Brandon nodded, grabbed his toolbox as if it were just another work day, and boarded the helicopter. When they landed, a small group of officers waited to receive him. There was a quiet air of respect among them. Admiral Lawson stepped forward. "Brandon Clark," he said, extending his hand. "I knew I wasn't wrong to call you. We worked together for years, and you were the best machinery officer I ever knew. Clearly you still are. I want to officially acknowledge the role you played in saving this operation." Brandon shook the Admiral's hand. He could feel the eyes of the team on him, but not like before. The doubt was gone. The Admiral reached into his pocket and handed Brandon a small white envelope. "This is your compensation for the consulting work, and an administrative review was conducted regarding the incident that led to your retirement. The failure previously attributed to your oversight has been reevaluated based on archived records. This is a formal apology and recognition of your years of service." Watkins approached. He seemed lighter than the day before, but something in his expression still held a mix of guilt and admiration. "Mr. Clark, I've studied that engine model for years, but you showed me that there's always more to learn." Brandon smiled, for the first time that day. A brief smile, but a genuine one. Brandon walked in silence toward the base helipad, accompanied only by the sound of his boots hitting the damp concrete. The sky over Kitsap was overcast, low clouds drifting with the ocean wind. In the distance, the USS Arleigh Burke was preparing to depart, its engines now running at full power, exactly as they should. Admiral Lawson stood waiting beside the helicopter. "You're all clear, Mr. Clark. The pilot will take you back." "Thank you, Admiral." Without another word, Brandon climbed the steps into the helicopter and took a seat by the window. As they lifted off, he watched the base grow smaller below. Technicians moved around the structures. The routine continued. But it wasn't until the helicopter climbed higher that he saw it. There it was, the destroyer that once carried the weight of his unjust failure. Massive, cutting through the bay waters, leaving a white trail of waves behind. Brandon kept his eyes fixed on the ship for a few moments, a silent realization that behind that towering structure was a part of him, his craft, his gift, his truth. From above, he watched the coastline slowly fade away. The sea reflected the gray light of morning, and in the distance the silhouette of the USS Arleigh Burke disappeared, little by little, back to its mission. And maybe, in its own way, offering a quiet thanks to the one who brought it back to the sea. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next.